Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, next session of the Nurture Me monthly webinar series, Understanding the ABC Attachment Biobehavioral Catch-up Treatment Model, featuring Liam Shaw. My name is Hannah Winkelhopper, and I am the Adverse Childhood Experiences and Substance Exposed Infant Prevention Coordinator for the Maine CDC. Before we introduce Liam, a little housekeeping. Today we're using Zoom's webinar format, which focuses on the presenter. However, you are encouraged to share questions with Liam to answer in the Q&A section, which I will be monitoring throughout the webinar. If you have any technical questions or would like to add to the conversation, please direct your comments into the general chat section. Near the conclusion of the webinar, Ryan Nealon from AdCare will share an evaluation link for today's presentation. We appreciate you taking a moment to provide your valued feedback, which helps ensure that we are providing quality content. Also, Ryan will be sure to email your participation certificates within 10 business days. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our presenter. Liam Shaw, LCSW, MBA, has earned a BSW from USM and an MSW from Boston University, a postgraduate certificate in nonprofit management from Boston University, and an MBA from USM. He has worked in the mental health field for 28 years and is currently the manager of outpatient pediatric behavioral health for the Maine General Medical Center's Edmond and Irvin Pediatric Center. And he is also the project director and principal investigator for the Central Maine Youth Trauma Initiative, a 5-year grant from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. Liam has received extensive training in the ABC Attachment and Biobehavioral Catch-up Model, the Positive Parent Program, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, structural family therapy, and client-directed outcome-informed services. Liam has also been adjunct instructor for Kennebec Valley Community College's mental health program since 2011. So please help me in welcoming Liam.
Thank you so much, Hannah. I appreciate it. Earlier in my career, I used to like to listen to my bio because it made me feel important or whatever. And now it's so long now that I just kind of feel old, but that's okay. But thank you so much for reading the whole thing. Hello, my name is Liam Shaw. Today we're going to be talking about attachment and biobehavioral catch-up model, or ABC. I'm just going to be referring it to as ABC in the process. So there we go. Yeah, you already heard a lot about me. I think, whenever I go to a training, I always kind of want to know kind of what are the credentials of the person standing in front of me, who's supposedly the expert, right? What's their background? What do they bring to the table? Should I value what they say or not? I think when it comes to ABC, I do feel pretty confident talking about it. Like I said, I've been involved in the mental health field, focusing, primarily on children and families for about 28 years. Worked in the treatment foster care field for about 20 years. So for those of you that know a little bit about attachment, you know that unfortunately attachment issues do tend to show up a lot in kids in foster care and things like that. I'm also one of the first 2 people trained in ABC in Maine. I'm gonna give you a little bit of a history about ABC in terms of how it came to Maine, just so you have a kind of understanding of the background of the situation, and then you can kind of make sense of where we are today. But I'll do that a little bit later on down the road once I give you a little introduction to ABC, so you can kind of set the context. Like I said, my background is also in trying to implement evidence-based practices, which ABC is definitely one of them. So ABC is a pretty different approach, working with a fairly different population. There aren't any services really that are super comparable to ABC currently in Maine. So what I really encourage folks to do is to ask questions, because depending on how well I do presenting it, I could see some people, kind of listening to this during their lunch hour or whatever, and being really challenged to really understand and wrap their head around the model, and understand and wrap their head around like how it works. So please ask questions, especially if I start throwing around a bunch of jargon that you don't know the acronyms for or whatever, or if I'm just presenting things, that you're struggling to kind of understand how it all fits together. Please do ask questions. I like questions, and Hannah's we Hannah and I have an agreement that she's going to interrupt me so that your questions get asked. Um, I'm also more than willing to talk about ABC to anybody who's interested. It's a real passion of mine. I think you'll find that comes through hopefully in the presentation and stuff. So if you have lingering questions or lingering thoughts or ideas or want to work on projects or whatever, at the conclusion of the um, presentation, I think I usually throw in a slide with my email, but if not, it's super, I think fairly easy to remember. It's just my name, liam.shaw@maingeneral.org. So feel free to shoot me an email if you want to talk at all about ABC. So let me try to paint a picture here of what the heck ABC is, how it works, how it fits, why, at least I think, and a lot of the research shows it's pretty amazing. Um, so ABC, attachment biobehavior catch up, was developed by a brilliant psychologist, Dr. Mary Dozier, who for most of her career worked at the University of Delaware. Um, I think her official title was I think she was the DuPont Chair of Neuroscience down there or something like that. So, and she's been funded, although I'm not sure currently, but was funded for a long time by the NIH. Right, I think 15 years continuously. And though, for those of you that know a little bit about funding, the NIH is some of the kind of the top level research funding available in the world, in the country, and maybe even in the world. And it's pretty unusual to get funded, especially around this area, for 15 years straight. So Mary Dozier's got an incredible amount of research. If you're a research person, if you like data, if you like research studies, Dr. Dozier is one of the most prolific researchers I've ever seen. Like every time I go on her website, she's got 15 more studies that she's produced. But if you just Google attachment biobehavior catch-up model, it should bring you to her website, and there's a tab that it talks about research, and there's probably close to 100 studies on ABC. So it's one of the best. I say this in most of all my trainings with ABC, and I haven't come across any situation where anybody's been able to disagree with me. I feel pretty confident saying it's the most well researched attachment intervention for kids and parents with the kids between the ages of 0 and 2. I call it a lot of times the gold standard. So ABC. So let's set the stage here. Let's try to paint a picture for you so you can kind of imagine in your mind or whatever what this service actually looks like. So ABC is for infants and young children, 0 to 24 months, who have experienced early adversity, right? So that can come in lots and lots of different ways. Could be the foster care, as in an attachment disruption, right, where they were born into a family and were removed, typically, right, typically because of the abuse or neglect, and they end up in foster care. And I probably should put foster care slash kinship care, class slash resource care, things like that. Basically, it's very effective intervention for kids that have experienced an attachment disruption with their biological parents. ABC has also been shown to be very effective with birth parents who have a history of maltreatment and neglect, right? First group is a group where the children have been removed and are placed with foster parents or resource parents or kinship parents, and they're doing ABC with the young child and the foster parent. They've also found ABC is very effective when it's done with the birth parent and the child as well. It's also been shown to be very effective with folks who have adopted children from other countries, which we know sometimes there can be some struggles there. And most recently, and very fortunately, I think, ABC, the research focus in the last 5 or 6 years has really focused a lot on using ABC and the ABC model with parents who have a substance use disorder, right? So parents, maybe in Maine, a lot of times, right, we have substance exposed infant reports that go out, right, when a mom's giving birth and tests positive for substances, or sometimes even when she's on different medications that are prescribed. We found a decent amount of success in Maine, and then also a lot of success on the research side and broader in terms of trying to help parents who are struggling with a substance use disorder make some attachments and strong connections to their children. This is not all the things ABC is effective with, and like I said, if you're a research person, please go to the ABC website and click on that research tab, and you can go wild. You could read ABC research studies for a very very long time. But here's just some of the things that the research on ABC has been shown to be, to improve. Um, Obviously, it was first off, right, attachment security, right, attachment security, attachment connection between the child and the primary caregiver. I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to go into a lot of diurnal cortisol production, but for those of us that know a little bit about diurnal cortisol production, what monitoring cortisol levels tends to look at stress. It's a way of calibrating stress, right? Because obviously, when you're dealing with kids that are 0 to 24 months, it's hard to ask them to complete a questionnaire on stress. So sometimes what they look at is cortisol production. It's also been shown to improve for kids the inhibitory control, um, executive functioning, shown reductions in negative affect for both kids and adults, improvements in receptive language for kids, and a lot of other biological markers. One of the things about Dr. Mary Dozier that's a little bit different from most psychologists she doesn't tend to rely a lot on sort of like what we would call sort of self-report data and things like that. She tends to take a little bit of a different approach with her research and really likes to find biological indicators that show that things are improving, which I think makes a little bit of sense when you think about this population, right? We've got kids that are 0 to 2, 0 to 24 months, so they can't really share a lot of information. And then sometimes you got parents, maybe they're involved with the HHS, maybe they're struggling with substance use disorder, maybe they have mental health issues or whatever. No offense to those folks, but sometimes when we ask people about how things are going, they feel like they have to answer in a certain way to, based on their situation. So Dr. Mary Dozier really tries to look at biological markers like EEG patterns and functional MRIs and stuff to really show that this intervention is effective, which I think for some people makes them even a little more confident in the research behind it, because again, it's not a bunch of, she doesn't go ask a bunch of parents, hey, do you, since you've done ABC, do you feel better now? And parents feel obligated to say yes. They're really looking at a lot of the biological indicators, or actual things you can measure, like improvements in executive functioning or reductions in negative affect. ABC ABC is what we call sort of a two-gen approach, right? And any folks that are familiar with, like, for example, the John T. Gorman Foundation, which is, the family foundation for the folks that started LLB or own LLB, and I guess I should say. They're very focused. If you're familiar with any of their funding and stuff, they're very focused on this, like, two-gen approach, right? So the idea is that most interventions, in the medical side or psychology side, target one generation because they're basically sort of targeting one particular person. Um, ABC is a two-gen approach because there's one intervention you're doing. There's one person doing an intervention with a parent and a child, but there's really both those parents and those children are being affected by the intervention and have shown improvement. So I think some of the reasons why people like the two-gen approach is that it's sort of, I think you can make the argument, is kind of a more bang for your buck, right? And when we think about parenting, right, we have to think about the function of the parent, and we have to functioning level of the parent, and then we have to think about the functioning level of the child. But we know, and if there you folks who've been parents or are parents or have worked with parents, um, it's a connected relationship, right? So what I mean by that is if you're working with a parent and a child and you're able to improve the functioning of the child, a lot of times the parent feels better and does better. And vice versa. If you're working with a child and a parent and you're able to increase the functioning of the parent, in a sense, that child now has a better, stronger, more stable parent. That's going to improve the functioning of the child. And so, what you see with ABC is you're targeting the parent in some ways and the child in some ways. And as they both start doing better, it can be a bit of an upward spiral, I would call. Unfortunately, in my work, a lot of times I come into contact with situations that are more of a downward spiral, right? One thing goes wrong and that causes something else to go wrong and wrong and wrong. ABC, one of the reasons why I love ABC is it tends to cause more of that upward spiral. And one of the reasons why I think NIH has opted to fund Dr. Dozier's research for 15 years straight is that she is her original cohort that she worked with under NIH funding, I think, is now like 18 years old. So it was about 18 years ago that she started this work. Um, in her latest round of research, where she looked at the children and the parents when the children were now 15 years old. So the parents are 15 years older than when they had the child, and that those children who are between 0 and 2 are now between 15 and 17. She is still able to get direct connections between the benefit, showing direct benefits because the children had ABC in compares to a control group. So just take a minute and let that sink in. I haven't gone into a lot of the detail about what ABC looks like, and I will in further slides, but basically what ABC is, it's a 10 session intervention. So what we're saying is this model allows you to go in and work with a parent and a child who's under the age of 2 for 10 sessions, which is approximately about 10 hours. If you're like me and you talk a lot, it's more like 12 or 13 hours, but we'll call it 10 just for the math's sake. So so ABC, you go and you do this 10-hour intervention, and Dr. Mary Dozier's research has been able to show that 15 years later, she can draw some direct connections between improvements in kids and improvements in parents from that 10-hour intervention, which is kind of amazing. All right. I assume there's no questions yet, so I'm going to just keep rolling until somebody tells me to stop. So, what does ABC change in parents? It changes the sensitivity, and you'll see why as I get into describing how the sessions work. But basically, it increases the sensitivity. It increases the skill and ability of the parent to tune in and have empathy and connection with their children. When you think about, for attachment's sake, that's pretty key. They also found an increase again with more of that fMRI data of neural activity in a positive way with the parent. So the parents who receive ABC are more sensitive at post intervention, and have lower intrusiveness than control group mothers, right? So intrusiveness, right? Again, which is something we can measure with parents, is you know that would a sign of intrusiveness would be a child's kind of playing nice and complacently with a bunch of toys on the floor. And the parent is like, oh no, don't play with that, play with this, and let's make them fight, or let's do this. The parent is intruding on the child's play when the play is going just fine without the parents. So folks who receive ABC are both more sensitive to their infants and children, and they're also less intrusive. And again, when like I said, Mary Dozier really focuses in on sort of measuring things scientifically. She feels confidence in saying that these are not small effects; these are medium to large. Which, as you know, if you're a researcher, once you get up to large effect, it's pretty impressive. And these gains, this particular gains of this study I'm citing, it was 3 years later, but many of the gains continue on for a long period of time. Again, just more data and more information to do my used car salesman to convince you that ABC is great. But right, we've got cortisol production, DNA methylation, inhibitory control, set shifting, and emotional expression. Again, you can look up all of these research papers I'm citing are all on her website. So let's get into painting this picture again. I think I started to paint it and then I put my paints down. I apologize. Um, so pick my paints back up. What is ABC? What does it look like? 10 sessions, right? Usually when I did ABC, I did more like an 11 session model because I would do some assessments and kind of just make sure the parent was 100% on board with ABC in a first kind of meeting, and then I would do the 10 actual sessions. And like I said, the sessions are designed to be about an hour. I tended to run longer, approximately. So again, all of the stuff I'm talking about, all the benefits, all the wonderful stuff that comes is really coming in sort of a 11 hour package. Part of the reason why I think ABC is so effective, and I think Mary Dozier would agree with this because she's really stuck to this approach, is that it's delivered in the home. And so what that means is, as a person who's provided ABC in the past, I've done ABC services at a homeless shelter, a domestic violence shelter. Uh, I've done ABC at campsite, where folks were living and stuff. So it's really designed to be delivered in the home environment where the child, the kid 0 to 24 months, and the caregiver are. Um, Now that goes against a lot of what practitioners like, right? Because I'm an LCSW, I'm a therapist. A lot of us LCSWs, we like to have our nice, pretty offices with our nice posters on the wall and toys and things like that. And we like to stay put and we like to have people come to us, which works pretty well for most
Liam,
interventions.
we
Yeah,
have a
go ahead.
question.
Great. Fire away.
Someone's wondering about who can provide ABC. Are there particular certifications or prerequisites?
Yeah, great question. And those are exactly the kind of questions I'd love for people to ask, again, because you can tell this person's trying to make sense of it. I don't know if I have slides on this, but I'll just jump ahead and answer it. And then if we get to slides, we can skip over them. So here's the cool thing about ABC. But again, it doesn't fit perfectly within the model that we usually understand, especially mental health services to fit into, but it actually provides us with some additional options because of it. So ABC, in order to be certified by ABC, what you need a 2.5 day training by ABC, which is again out of University of Delaware. and then you need typically it takes about a year of consultation with them as you're providing the model. So in order to be able to start providing the model, you need about 2.5 days of training, and then in order to be certified, you need to do that about a year of work, and you have to meet certain criteria that I'll get into later down the road. So it's a pretty rigorous certification process, which again, I think I have some slides that I will detail this for you more down the road. But here's the interesting thing. ABC themselves does not put any educational requirements on the training. So what that means is there's an organization, I think it's in New York City. It's called the Power of Two, right? So it's pretty much focused, you can guess, on attachment and parenting. Power of Two used some grant funds years ago and trained parents that were formerly involved with, New York City's version of DHHS. So they took parents that were formerly involved with DHS for abuse and neglect and trained them as ABC coaches, and then put them out there in the neighborhoods to work with the families. So these folks might have a GED, might not even have that. And then you contrast it with the state of Minnesota. I'm not sure if this is still true, but at one point in time, about half the providers of ABC in Minnesota had PhDs, PhD psychologists, I assume. Um, so you have that full, with the full gamut from folks with GEDs to PhDs. But ABC does not put forth requirements. They do not say you have to have a bachelor's degree or a master's degree or a doctorate degree. They don't say you have to have a background in anything. They don't say you had to take certain classes or anything else like that. They're just interested. There's a little bit of a screening process. They're interested in folks that can be verbal, which I'll get into why that's important, and have kind of positive attitudes toward parenting and attachment and stuff. But they don't have educational requirements. So, for example, folks, there've been a variety of folks that provide ABC in Maine. Most of them have had college degrees, but again, that was something that we did in Maine, not per se. ABC did not. So, no educational requirements, just training requirements, which again makes it pretty different. So again, the sessions are delivered in home. Hopefully that answered the question, and if not, follow up with Hannah, and she can ask a follow up or whatever. So it's delivered in home, not in a clinic, not in an office, but in home. And Mary Dozier, Dr. Dozier, felt like if you're going to try to train parents, and really, that's what this is, it's a parent training model in a lot of ways. But if you're going to try to train parents, if you're going to try to get parents to do something different than the way they've been doing things before, if you bring them into a fancy office or a clinic or whatever, she feels like those skills are not going to be they're not going to be able to replicate those skills as much. So she didn't want the intervention to be done with, like, let's say a therapist's office has a nice array of toys and there's not the same toys back home and things like that. So she feels very, very strongly about having this service delivered in home, which is wonderful and makes a lot of sense, but it makes this service again more complicated, because what that means is if you're going to be providing ABC, you're driving. You're driving all over the place. You're driving to maybe neighborhoods that are a little scary at times. You're walking into apartments or situations, right? You're walking into people's homes and you don't know, is the chain on the pit bull strong enough, or hopefully that's not a shotgun leaning in the corner of the trailer park, or whatever. And I'm not trying to disparage people, I'm just trying to say those are the realities of the situations that you walk into. So ABC is a fantastic model, but not everybody can really provide it well. You have to be comfortable going into people's homes. You have to be comfortable trying to make connections with people enough to allow where they allow you to go in their home. And remember, a lot of these folks have had previous DHS involvement. So the idea of letting some sort of professional come into their home to look around and to work with them is a very scary thing. So it takes a lot of trust and a lot of convincing sometimes to have folks allow us as ABC providers to go into the home. So what does it look like? 10 sessions, we're doing it in the home. We're involving the primary caregivers, and that can mean anything. That can mean one parent, two parents. Um, I had a case once where in Maine, where the infant was removed at birth due to the mom testing positive for cocaine. The infant was placed with the biological father's mother and stepdad, right? So sort of paternal grandparents, but the biological parents were allowed sort of unlimited access, unlimited visitation. So when our referral came in to do ABC, most people I think would have just, gone and done ABC with the parents, with the biological parents, or with the grandparents, who are kind of like foster parents in this situation. Um, I opted to actually do ABC with all four parents at first, both the biological parents and the grandparents. And the goal there was to provide them some common language and a common understanding of how to approach this infant, to kind of bridge some gaps. It was a lot more work, but yeah, I think it was effective in the end. Um, so we want the primary caregivers there. We want the child. Again, the child has to be under the age of 24 months, but other caregivers can be there. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, other siblings can be involved. They can't be the primary focus, obviously, but they can be involved in things like that. Um, if you looked at a lot of the videos, and I'll explain to you what I mean by videos, but when I videotape sessions, there's dogs, there's cats, we had a few parrots and things like that. So it's a pretty, when you think about delivering a model in somebody's home, you got to be pretty flexible. So so ABC has two major components that they've really measured and are really built into the manual, the training manual of ABC. And I'm going to hopefully explain both of them pretty in depth to you. One is called ITM, so that's in the moment commenting and coding, and then the other one is session by session content. So in the moment commenting, ITM, so it's real time feedback delivered by providers, the parent coaches, the ABC coaches, and it's exclusively focuses on nurturance, following the lead, following the lead with delight, avoiding intrusive and frightening behaviors. And the goal is frequent, descriptive, and on target feedback. So what does that mean? Here's what it looks like. If I go into a home and I'm providing the ABC treatment model and I'm providing it to Fidelity, what that means is I'm providing the caregiver parent, with at least one of these in the moment comments, at least one every 60 seconds. So let that sink in for a minute. So what that means is if I'm there providing the model at the home with the parent for an hour, and if I'm practicing the model to fidelity, which takes a long time to get there, most people do it in a year. It took me about a year and a half. I was a little slow. Um, but if I'm doing it to fidelity, what what I will have accomplished within that 60 minutes, that 1 hour, is that I will have made at least 60 of these ITM comments to the parent in during that time, um, which is a lot. I've done therapy for 28 years. I don't think I ever. There's plenty of times when you would see me not make any kind of comment, 60 times during the course of an hour of therapy. So it's a very different model. Um, you can see though why, and these are all strength-based comments. These are not like disparaging comments, or there's not a lot of correction, as you'll see, and things like that. These are usually positive based comments where we're complimenting a parent on doing something that's in line with the ABC model. Um, you can see how for a parent that was maybe involved with DHS, or maybe has a substance use disorder, or maybe struggles with mental health, or maybe it's a teen parent or a parent who has intellectual disabilities or something like that. The folks that get ABC tend to be the folks that have not always had positive interactions with professionals, and certainly don't always feel like good parents. So they're walking away. If I'm doing my job, they're walking away with at least 60 comments from me, sometimes the same one over and over again, but 60 comments from me that are typically positive and encouraging in nature. So you can see why it's a very different experience for a parent than almost anything else out there. Um, so people might be scratching their heads saying, "Okay, Liam, like how do these fancy ITM comments work?" So let's say I'm doing a session, and let's say the kid's a little bit older, right? So they're more of a toddler, maybe like 16 months or whatever. And let's say the parent was interacting with the child, and then the child kind of wandered away, right, to go play with a toy or look at something. And let's say during the course of wandering away, she kind of fell down. Nothing, no trip to the ER or anything, but just fell down as toddlers do. Um, and let's say the parent went over and picked that child up. So how would ABC look at that interaction, and what would an ABC coach say? Well, first of all, according to the model, to fidelity and things like that, I would describe the behavior. So I would say to the parent out loud, "Hey, when she fell down, you went right over and picked her up." Right. So I'm describing the behavior. That's the first part. The second part is labeling that behavior. First, I've described it. Now I'm labeling it as an ABC target. Why is that behavior important to ABC? I'd say something like, "That was a great example of you nurturing her," right? Because we identified that nurturance and nurturing is one of the targets of ABC. So I'm taking the behavior, I'm describing what she did, and then I'm connecting it directly to ABC. And then the third part, the trifecta, is that I'm trying to provide a sort of a research-backed outcome, or trying to help the parent understand why exactly that behavior that I'm describing and connecting to ABC is so important. And I might say something like, "She will not only develop trust in you, but also in others." So everything we're doing with ABC is trying to not only make connections between the children and the parents, but we're trying to help the parents understand why those behaviors are positive for the child, both in the moment, right? She felt nurtured, and long term, right? We can point to research that says when parents are more responsive and more nurturing, they develop more trust in the parents. And we know that when kids trust their parents more, they tend to, in general, not everybody, but in general, be more trusting of others and more willing to trust others. So I'm going to pause for a second and give you a chance to ask questions or whatever, because this is a huge part of ABC. If this makes sense to you, then I think the rest of the model will make sense. If this doesn't make a lot of sense, then we might be in some trouble. Okay, no, Hannah's not coming off mute, so I'm assuming it's okay. All right, so that's ITM. Then the second part is that there's 10 sessions. They're distinctly different, but they focus on different things. So
We do have
sessions.
another question.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. Yeah, shoot.
Someone said that they're curious about the cutoff of 24 months.
Yeah, I don't know the exact reason. I know a little bit of I have some guesses. Right, whenever you're doing research, you got to have a cutoff in some way. So right, so you got to come up with that. The other thing that I think Mary Dozier was looking at was, if you look at interactions, this is more my guess. I think she might have said this too, so I think it's fairly factual. If you look at interactions between a parent, right? If that child is under the age of 2, the interactions are very different than if the child is 4 versus 6 versus 13, right? So she really focused in on those times when, there's a lot more dependence. When kids are under the age of 2, they're less, independent, they're less, right? A 4-year-old is hard to corral and hard to make an intervention with, because they might be wanting to go out and play with 4 or 5 toys, whereas sometimes a kid under the age of 2 is a little bit more comfortable sitting there interacting with the parent. So I think part of it was, focusing our research on that. ABC does have an intervention for kids that are older, but again, I'm not trained in it, so I can't really talk about it. But yeah, I think the focus was on how do we get in there as early as possible, right? Because we know attachment patterns are set pretty early, And then, how can we focus our intervention on on the age level of kids that are a little bit more easy. Control is probably not the best way to put it, but to contain, I guess. Like I said, if that answers your question, great. If not, follow up with Hannah with a follow up, and I'll try to explain it more. So sessions 1 through 2 are looking at just providing nurturance. Sessions 3 and 4 are what we call following the lead with delight, which I'll explain what that means. 5 or 6, we are avoiding intrusive and frightening behaviors. 7 and 8, we're doing something called voices from the past, which is really sort of exploring, not in a therapy way, but exploring the idea that you as parents are typically, if you're a parent, you've been influenced by the way you were parented, which could be good or bad or whatever, but it's having a discussion a little bit about how that person grew up and was parented and how it affects their view of parenting and how that experience might fit with ABC or not fit with ABC. And then session 9 and 10 is really consolidating gains and celebrating the changes that they're seeing. So if you see the progression, right, we're starting with nurturance, we're starting with kind of somewhat easier, somewhat more positive things. Then we're not really trying to alter the behavior or correct the behavior in the parent, at least until session 5 or 6, right after we've had some better connections with parents. We're not trying to have those hard connections about the way they were parented until 7 or 8. So it's a progressive approach to working with a parent that relies on kind of scaffolding, kind of building that relationship with the parent, before you get into the more complex stuff like giving them some corrections or talking about how they were parented themselves. So ABC's got a bunch of endorsements. You can look them up. The Maternal, Infant, and Early Childhood Visiting Folks, the California Evidence-Based Clearinghouse. It's on SAMHSA's National Registry. In Maine, the John T. Gorman Foundation, the Ella Bean Foundation, they were the folks that funded provided the original funding about 6 years ago to bring ABC services to Maine. We've also since then gotten some funding through Maine Mom, which is MOM stands for the Maternal Opioid Misuse Project. And then we unfortunately weren't able to get some funding from Maine Care through an 1115 waiver, but we did apply for that. We got some permissions. We just weren't able to follow through with that. But there's definitely been some support in Maine as well. So that's the end of the formal presentation. Let me talk a little bit. Let me just give you a little history of where ABC has been and where we are currently, because that usually is a question that comes up. And like I said, here's my email, and feel free to email me with any questions. So here's the background. And some of you folks may be familiar with Dr. Elaine O'Connor. She's kind of one of the leaders in Maine in working with parents, especially moms with substance use disorder. She works for Maine Health now, but she used to work for Maine General, and she and I and another doctor here, Dr. Lindsay Tweed, who was formerly the medical director for OCFS in Maine. Dr. O'Connor was talking about how she was running these groups for parents, moms that had substance use disorder, and they would bring their children in. And she was talking about how some of the moms were like uh, almost you would call like fussy or intrusive, right? Constantly talking to the kids, constantly kind of picking at things, moving their hair, fixing their clothes, telling them stop stuff, start stuff, right? Intrusive kind of stuff. And then other moms, again, unfortunately, we're kind of picking on moms, but that was the group that was there. Other moms were kind of almost the exact opposite, kind of disinterested in their children. Their children would kind of wander off and get into stuff, and the moms wouldn't even pay attention. And so Dr. Tweed and I were talking to her a little bit about attachment and how attachment can be a factor in how people parent. And she got very excited. She's like, yeah, that's it. That's it. How do we help these parents with attachment? And so Dr. Tweed and I provided her with some literature. We both of us have been familiar with ABC through reading, not through experience. gave her some information on ABC. She got very excited about it. So we wrote a proposal to the John T. Gorman Foundation. They provided us with money to get a couple ABC coaches trained. I was one of them. Uh, and we had an OB nurse who was trained. I focused more on Augusta, and the OB nurse focused on Waterville. But that was the about 6 7 years ago. That was the first time ABC had come to Maine. um, Basically, right now we're the only we only have a few providers of ABC, but basically we're the only folks providing that I'm aware of, only people group that's providing ABC services north of New York City. So Boston doesn't have ABC, New Hampshire doesn't have ABC, as far as I know. Vermont, it's only in Maine. Um, so we started off about 6 7 years ago providing ABC services. Dr. O'Connor, because of her specialty of providing MOUD medications for opioid use disorder to pregnant parents, 100% of the parents we worked with for the first 2 years of ABC had either they had a substance use disorder, typically opioid use disorder, or their partner had opioid use disorder diagnosis, or sometimes both did. So we kind of purposely picked a little different population, a little more challenging population. A lot of those folks had involvement with DHS and things like that. We did that for a few years. Unfortunately, COVID hit and things like that, so we had to modify our protocols. And then a few years ago, the Maine Moms Maternal Opioid Misuse Project provided us some funding. We were then able to expand out, and we've had a few ABC coaches trained who work for what we call CDS, Child Development Services. Now, I believe their official title is Early Intervention for Me, but it's basically, the folks formerly of CDS. We've had some of their coaches, some of their employees trained as ABC coaches. So we have some coverage for ABC in Oxford County. We have some coverage for ABC in Androscoggin County, and we have some coverage for ABC in Kennebec and Somerset County. That's about it right now. We would love to expand ABC to the entire state. We would love to expand. We would love to offer ABC services for parents that are involved at DHS, right? Because ABC, when you think about it, when you're talking about attachment, a lot of times people say, "Well, what's a good referral? What was a good referral look like for ABC?" Well, first of all, the kid has to be under 24 months. That's the main thing. But basically, the way I describe it is, if you think of a parent, if there's any reason to think that that parent might struggle with attaching and connecting to their child, ABC is a very positive intervention, right? It's very strength based, it's very interactional, it's very relationship based. It's really focused on getting the parent to enjoy their child, right? There's a thing that we talked about before called following the lead with delight. Well, following the lead means basically when you watch most people interact with children, right? The parent or the adult is setting the tone and setting the lead, right? What do? They say, "Okay, come here, little child, come sit on my lap. We're going to read a book. How we're going to we're going to read this particular book, and we're going to read it from front to back. And I'm going to tell you, this is a blue ball, this is a red square, that sort of thing." And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a very much a teaching model. ABC's following the lead takes that and puts it on its head, twists it around and make to the opposite. And so what ABC would say, instead of doing that, let's put a bunch of toys out in front of a child, let the child kind of select what they want to play with, and then you respond to the child very much like almost like a play therapist would, where you're observing and commenting on what the child's doing, and you're maybe playing with or interacting or imitating the child, but it's not the child imitating your lead, you're imitating the child's lead. So it's found to really kind of, it stimulates kids, makes them feel a little more autonomy, makes them feel a little more powerful, makes them feel like they have a little more control over their environment. So that's following with the lead. And then following the lead with delight is just basically doing that and then smiling and having all these positive interactions. So you can see how that would be really effective for kids, maybe that whose parents are struggling from postpartum depression or mental health issues. But basically what we say is a good ABC referral is anybody who might struggle with attachment and connection to their child under the age of 24 months. So it's really mental health issues. It's really substance use disorder issues. If especially if the parents have, some significant attachment or trauma issues in their own background. Could be folks that were raised in the DHS system who are in foster care themselves. Could be teen parents. Could be parents with intellectual disorders and things like that. Could be a parent coming out of incarceration and things like that. Those are really the best referrals, in a lot of ways, because those are the folks that know they haven't had a lot of their own experiences, and nobody's ever really taught them how to have those positive interactions and positive connections with their own children. So you're coaching them, you're guiding them in that process. So like I said, we got some limited dispersals of ABC, unfortunately, and here's the reality check, and I know we got to wrap up in a few minutes, but
We have a new
ABC.
question.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, sure.
Is there any funding to support folks in Maine interested in pursuing certification?
Well, here we go. Give that person $5 or whatever. That was just what I was going to go talk about. So here's the limitation with ABC right now, as it currently sits. It could change, but right now, as it currently sits, there's no great way to reimburse people for the ABC service. It's not in the main care manual. If you're a therapist, you can certainly bill family therapy for the time, but most therapists don't want to drive out to somebody's house and do all that. Um, so it hasn't we haven't found a way to pay for ABC services. That was a little bit of about what we were looking at for the 1115 waiver. We just haven't been able to get everything lined up. So right now, there's no clear way to reimburse ABC services. We do it through a grant we have. KBH does it through funding through their opioid health home. The CDS folks do it because, with CDS funding. So that's one of the challenges. ABC is amazing. It will do amazing things for people in Maine in all those categories. It certainly is connected to the opioid. We'd like to get maybe some opioid settlement money that could help as well. We just haven't been able to do it. So the sad answer right now is there's no funding right now, wide funding for payment for ABC services. You got to be creative in how you do it, and we do not currently have, for the first time in about 7 years, because we got the John T. Gorman Foundation funding, we had the Maine Moms funding, and we also funded some of it through our 5-year NCTSN grant, the Central Maine Youth Trauma Initiative. Unfortunately, for the first time in about 7 years, we do not have any funding to pay for any coaches to be trained. And unfortunately, it's a fantastic training that I love, but it's very expensive. It's about $10,000 for the training and then a year of consultation. So it's not cheap. But again, if people want to email me, I'm more than willing to collaborate on projects and try to get funding and try to figure out how to get more ABC services to Maine, and especially how to get more ABC coaches trained as well. And I strongly recommend, Google ABC uh, attachment biobehavioral catch up. Google it and go to the website and poke around. You can see videos, you can see research studies. They have all the information listed about every aspect of ABC that you could be interested in. I think we're about 12:55. Any other questions from anybody, Hannah, or any other things people want me to chat about as we wrap up?
I'm not seeing any more questions, but we can give it a minute or
Okay.
so.
So yeah, let me just tell you. Let me finish with a story. And sometimes I choke up a little bit when I tell the story, but I try not to. But I'll leave you with a sort of an emotional story. Um, so I worked with a parent who had a opioid use disorder. Uh, she was probably, at the time I worked with her, late 20s. She had been using heroin and kind of involved in that lifestyle for about 10 years. So she had lived with folks that dealt drugs. She had lived at a trap house. Like she was pretty involved in that aspect of things, and had a daughter. And then she was able to go through a program that I used to run called MEP. It was Maine Enhanced Parenting Project. And she was able to get sober and makes just some fantastic changes in her life, and has, as far as I know, has been sober about 5 years now. Um, but after getting sober, she ended up getting pregnant. And she and I had kept in contact, so I let her know about this program, and so I did ABC with her, and her young son, who is about 6 months at the time. And she just, this was the perfect intervention for her, because she was smart and she was really interested in being a better parent, and that's what ABC really guides folks in doing. A lot of interaction, a lot of positive reinforcement. I remember we had a just wrapped up a particularly good session, and I was kind of wrapping up, and she had tears in her eyes, and kind of just assumed. I was like, wow, maybe I must have said something wrong. Maybe I offended her. Maybe I was trying to think about what I might have done that was stupid. Uh, and I said, are you okay? Did I do something wrong? And she said, no. She said, I'm just thinking about how different my life would be if my older daughter had this opportunity of ABC. Um, so it was very powerful, and she, I think, was realizing, parents want to be good parents. I've worked with people that have horribly neglected and abused their children and in foster care, and the vast majority of those folks still wanted to be best good parents. They just didn't know how to do it. People really want to be good parents. They just don't always have the guidance and the support and the knowledge, and nobody shows them how to do it. So when you get somebody that feels like they're a bad parent, and you show them that, no, actually you aren't a bad parent, you're actually doing a really fantastic job, it's a game changer. It's a game changer for the parents, it's a game changer for the kid. You're changing the trajectory of the family, you're changing the interactions, right? We know attachment stuff lasts a long time. So it's a really powerful intervention. And when you think about it, 10 sessions in 10 sessions, it can be provided by somebody with a high school diploma, so it's not super expensive other than the training, and it can last a lifetime. It's a pretty cool thing. So I definitely, if you took the time to come to this webinar, I definitely encourage you to look into ABC further, and let me know if there's anything I can do to be helpful.
We have one more question.
All righty.
Um, what can parents/foster parents do if attachments are not formed prior to 24 months?
Yeah, it's a good question. ABC does, like I say, have an intervention for kids that are older. In a perfect world, I would refer those folks to an intervention called CPP, child parent psychotherapy. That's a really strong evidence-based approach that works with kids that are over two, or some other type of approved attachment therapy. Um, because we used to think attachment, if there was a certain window that would close and you couldn't affect attachment after that. Most of the research doesn't support that. Certainly gets harder as kids get older, but there's things you can do. So I would look into CPP, and again, you can direct that person to shoot me an email, and I can try to be helpful with that as well. All right, it looks like people
Thank
probably
you
got a
so much.
yes. Thank you, folks, for having me. And like I said, let me know if there's anything I can do that's helpful.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And Ryan just put the evaluation in the chat. So if everyone wouldn't mind doing that, that would be great. But thank you again, Liam. We appreciate you being here.
All right. Thank you, folks, for sharing your lunch hour with me. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody.